I think one of the things that Jill Ruby, the NNSA administrator, has said is that we need to have a resilient infrastructure that allows us to scale up or down the production according to what the national security needs are. I would say we don't have that today, but that's what we're working towards. So, particularly as we get both the Los Alamos capability and then the Savannah River capability up and running, that will give us the basic infrastructure that we need to scale up if we have to, or scale back and reduce the production rate if conditions change. Now, I would say, as you point out right now in the geopolitical situation, it's harder to see the scenario where we would be scaling down. I mean, New START is likely not going to be extended. If we were going to extend New START, there'd have to be negotiations happening right now with Russia, which clearly under the current circumstances can't happen. But a modern, more responsive infrastructure will allow you to do that. But we do have some work ahead of us to get to that point. Right now, I would not say we're able to turn on a dime and ramp things up, but we're making progress to getting to that.
So the impetus, I think, was that the last Strategic Posture Commission was held in 2008, 2009. And folks on the Hill, senior folks on the Hill in both houses, had recognized that the world has changed dramatically since that time, 13, 14 years ago. And they wanted a new look at the world. And so they decided to create this congressional commission. As you said, there were 12 members nominated by senators and members of the House, six nominally Republicans, 6 nominally Democrats. And the commission began its work in 2022 and slogged our way through 2022 and into 2023. And as you say, just issued our final report last month. So it was, I think it did surprise a lot of people. The report is very, very robust in any number of areas. It is very wide in the subject matter it addresses, but it is threat-based. We spent a lot of time with the intelligence community. It is bipartisan. And it is, in fact, a consensus report. All of the commissioners sign up to every hard-fought word in the document.
And the number one thing that has changed out there, to my mind, is the Russia-China military alliance. Even a few years ago, there were skeptics, but I think as we see China's wholehearted support of Russia in its illegal invasion of Ukraine, now running into the second year, there is no doubt that this really is, as Xi Jinping says, an alliance with no limits. And that means that our concept of integrated deterrence has to step up. You and I, when we talk about integrated deterrence, I got to tell you, I don't like the term integrated deterrence. It just doesn't have that snappy sell. It's not like containment or massive retaliation, just from a phraseology standpoint. I don't think integrated deterrence quite gives us the sense of urgency or really portrays what they're trying to get at. And that is the rock bottom fact that deterrence is now not just about ICBMs in silos, bombers that have weapons and can be made ready pretty quickly, and of course the submarine leg. For so many decades, we said, hey, we've got the ICBMs, we've got the bomber leg, we've got the submarine leg, we're good to go, we've got deterrence. And that was true, even as we looked at the fluctuating warhead levels and came down through the positive impacts of arms control and the end of the Cold War. Well, today, making deterrence credible requires more than just the three legs of the triad. And honestly, I think this is what the Department of Defense and the Pentagon is trying to get at. You've really got to add in the nuclear command and control. Yes, that was always there. But now you have to add in your ability to dominate in space and secure cyberspace capabilities and communications. And then let's put on top of that one more thing, which is the use of artificial intelligence to enhance the credibility of the deterrent platforms that we do have. And why? Because now we are not just facing Russia, we are facing also China on its march to increase its nuclear weapons, and frankly, North Korea, which says they want to try it as well, and Iran, who knows what's going on. So keeping that deterrence credible now requires a lot more. And so I just think integrated deterrence doesn't quite give you enough of the keywords that are essential to our nuclear force posture.
If it is not the most storied institution or organization in the U.S. Air Force, I would challenge anyone to find one that is more storied. Not just from World War II, but from the Cold War through Desert Storm 1 and through all the way through today, through the global war on terror, and now into a new era of competition and peer adversary competition. So I would break down for folks who are maybe not so familiar with what a numbered Air Force does. I would say in the case of 8th Air Force, we really do two things, and it goes down to some very simple language in my mind, and this is how I assess myself each day and what we do. The first thing is in the spirit of the orders that we follow. It is be prepared to ... So when we say we must be prepared to do something, we have to organize, we have to train, and we have to equip our people. We have to develop our leaders and our airmen to do things that we are asked to do in the future. So it's making smart decisions about how we allocate resources, manage resources, and lead our people and develop our people so that we can best be prepared to be an on-call long-range strike force for the nation. There's about 24,000 airmen in 8th Air Force who are at various stages of their career, obviously, from airmen. In my case, I've been in for 31 years, and we have people probably on a bus from San Antonio right now to the bases in 8th Air Force. But for the most part, it is bomber aircraft, it is command and control platforms in the case of the E-4B, and it is those things that we do primarily for strategic command. And that leads me to the second simple language approach to how I say what it is we do, which is on order ... And that on order is literally from the President, Secretary of Defense, and Joint Chiefs of Staff down through the combatant command, STRATCOM as assigned forces in this case, to do something that we are called to do under crisis or in competition to preserve options for our country. So those really are the two kind of simple approaches: be prepared to and on order. So that's kind of how I've been in really try and simplify through language what it is we do every day.
When I came to the University of Oklahoma back at the end of 2019, with the president, the new president at the time, Joe Harris, we set on creating a new strategic plan for the university that was needed. It really was needed. It's called the Lead On University Strategic Plan. It lays out the North Star for the University of Oklahoma, right? It lays out where we're going, what our ambitions are, and what are the key strategic verticals, areas of focus, right, where we're going to grow and have an impact. From a research perspective, it lays out everything, but from a research perspective, it lays out 4 strategic verticals where we're going to invest and we're going to grow to have impact on society and train our students for that. And one of those 4 strategic verticals is aerospace and defense. So we made a conscious decision, right, that we were going to invest in creating a new institute. We're going to hire new faculty aimed at that institute. We created a strategy around aerospace and defense. We were incredibly fortunate to be able to hire retired Lieutenant General Gene Kirkland, who was the commander of Air Force Sustainment at Tinker. And so he came and helped us lead in that direction. We then brought in other people retired from the Air Force and others in the space of advanced radar, test and evaluation and things of that nature. And so we've been making a very conscious investment in building the capacity internally at the university to then go and work with the sponsors and say, yes, we're investing, right? Now let's bring in, the multi-$100 million programs that are going to fuel the enterprise.
And it has been for a long time, actually. Many people came to the lab to work on fusion and slowly learned about our national security missions and moved into other roles over time, myself included. I came to do laser experiments. And then over the arc of my early career, learned about our nuclear missions and really became a national security lifer. So, these experiments, these laser experiments, are incredibly complex challenges in material science, in physics, in computational design, in engineering. And so the best people are drawn to these really, really hard problems. And if you think about the way we take care of the stockpile today, what that really means is we need people whose judgment we can trust. So giving them these really complex problems to work on is part of how we train and test and challenge them over time to really be prepared to make the kind of high consequence decisions we need them to make. So it's an enormous recruiting tool. And since we've gotten Ignition, even more so, one might say it's a beacon, drawing people to our lab at this moment. And that's great. It's really great. And I'll just note, the National Ignition Facility was built to support stockpile stewardship. Of course, one of the central goals was to achieve fusion ignition in the laboratory, but the NIF has done many other things over the last 30 years. The NIF's been operating for about 15 years. Over that period of time, we've learned a lot about material properties, radiation transport, other physics that we care about, and developed experimental platforms that would have been inconceivable 20 years ago. So it's really been quite an amazing tool for science, for recruiting, for training, for challenging, and for advancing our knowledge of nuclear weapons physics.
NSA was in a resurgence of mission. We'd come through what Tom Mason would call, the 3 ages, and we had entered the 4th age of deterrence, and it was going to require some changes in how we were managing our infrastructure and how we were managing our life extension programs, and potentially how we would have to manage new production facilities. We needed more people. When you look back at the last decade, the NNSA program dollars have doubled in the last decade, from a roughly $10 billion enterprise to an over $20 billion with a B dollar enterprise. And 80%, roughly 80% of our costs are personnel costs. So that means, we're a big recruiter. We're recruiting and have been for the last 5 years. It's been a growth industry, and it's not going away. So this year, we're going to target to hire across the national nuclear security enterprise. This is including my M&O partners as well as the federal workforce. We're going to recruit 9,000 new hires. 9,000 new hires in 1 year. And so for the folks out there listening, if you have a friend or a student or you have a mid-career person who's looking for a mission they can sink their teeth into, a mission they can come and do for a decade or 2 or 3, they can raise their family working for us, and we need them. This mission's not going away, and we're not shrinking, we're growing, and America needs us. So this recruiting effort that we started back in 2019, we haven't let up. We've hit our targets each year. We've watched very carefully this attrition thing that's happening. And so where we needed to, we made some adjustments in our targets, our hiring targets, to accommodate higher attrition. because we've seen some higher attrition in some of our sites. But all of that is working together as a team to make sure we get the right people in the right place at the right time to do this very important mission for America.
The Nevada National Security Site is made up, of course, of our Nevada National Security Site, which is about 65 miles north of where I am right now in Las Vegas. It's a site larger than Rhode Island, and as I always tell people, it's a lot more interesting than Rhode Island. We do a lot of incredibly cool and important national security work. So we have about, when you carrying all our subcontractors and teammates and everybody, we're over 4,000 people. And what we do is, as our motto is, we secure America's future, because, as you know better than anybody, the foundation of our security as a nation and of our allies' security is our nuclear deterrent. And we are focused on making sure that nuclear deterrent is safe, secure, and effective. Now, as you know, I know you had one of our historians on the podcast not too long ago, Darwin Morgan, and he told you about the incredible history of the site, and that history is of close to 1,000 nuclear tests, both above ground and below ground. He told you about all the cool stuff we do. Well, we still are focused. Our primary mission is stockpile stewardship, right? It is making sure that our nuclear deterrent is safe, secure, and effective.
I think superiority matters for warfighting, for coercion and high stakes crises, and for deterrence. And so I'll just go through each of those. God forbid, if there is a full scale nuclear exchange, obviously numbers of nuclear weapons matter. If the United States absorbs 1 or 2 or 10 nuclear weapons, that would be a catastrophe of historic proportions. But absorbing hundreds or thousands or tens of thousands of nuclear weapons would be even worse. And so the nuclear balance of power between the United States and its adversaries does determine nuclear war outcomes. Now, obviously, the purpose is to deter nuclear war in the first place, but I think if we want to be serious nuclear strategists, we do need to think the unthinkable, is the way Herman Kahn put it, and think about that. Okay, so if there are differences in nuclear war outcomes, then that does affect, I think, nuclear coercion. And many nuclear strategists over the years have thought about nuclear deterrence as a game of chicken. Think of 2 cars on a collision course. Which car is going to swerve first? You can think about the Cuban Missile Crisis, where the United States and the Soviet Union were kind of on a collision course. The Soviet Union swerved and moved missiles. So what determines who wins these games of nuclear brinkmanship, these games of nuclear chicken? And I argue in the book that the nuclear balance of power does matter, that if the nuclear war is going to be very catastrophic for one side, less catastrophic for the other side, the country that has superiority, that's in the stronger position, is going to be more willing to run risks. Now, that's not to say that they automatically win, that the other side automatically backs down, but on average, as leaders are making these gut-wrenching decisions, should we escalate this important crisis to achieve our objectives, or should we back down to avoid nuclear war? The country in the superior position is going to be more likely to say, this is tough, but let's stand firm. The country in the inferior position is going to be more likely to say, this is tough, it's time to seek off-ramps. Or to use the chicken analogy, we might expect the smaller car to swerve first, even if a crash is bad for both. And then the third and final point is for deterrence itself. If you're going to play a game of nuclear chicken and you have to drive a Prius and the other guy's driving a Hummer, you're probably going to say, you know what, I'd rather not play today. And the next day say, you know what, I'd rather not play today. And so I think that's why, from theoretical terms, that nuclear superiority does matter. And then I think there are several reasons why, in particular, pursuing a more robust nuclear force makes sense for the United States, more so than for other countries.
So the United States was out testing in the Pacific, and the logistics to get out to the Pacific was just unbearable. The safety requirements to get out there, the number of people that they were trying to get out there, and then they were starting to have security issues with all the fishing trawlers that were coming around from the other nations. So the military went to the president and asked, can we go and see if we can find a place in the continental United States to do the lower yield nuclear tests? And the president said yes. And so they started a top secret program called Project Nutmeg. And they began the search here in the United States for a site. They look at Galveston, Texas, and where Camp Lejeune is in North Carolina. The idea was there is that those radioactive clouds would go out into the Gulf of Mexico or the Atlantic Ocean. They went and looked at Dugway Proving Grounds in Utah. They looked back where Trinity had been done in New Mexico, and then came out to the Nevada, what was then the Nellis Bombing and Gunnery Range, looked there, settled on that location. There was a very small enclosed valley that they could use, and chose that location. The president signed the paperwork on December 18th, 1950. 45 calendar days later, they dropped the first bomb on the United States out on Frenchman Flat.
And one of the things I tried to talk about in the essay, are two sort of really big questions. One is deterrence easy or is deterrence hard? Because there's a school of thought starts with Brody really in 1945, right after the detonation of the nuclear weapons at Hiroshima and Nagasaki, that basically says, look, up until now, defense establishments have had as their business preparation for war. From now on, their preparation has to be to prevent war. And so there's this emphasis on deterrence and this sense that the fact of nuclear weapons, and particularly once the Soviets test in 1949 and their two nuclear powers, that it's kind of easy because both sides have nuclear weapons and neither one really wants to use them. This is an idea, it's sometimes called existential deterrence. The late Kenneth Waltz, among others, had touted this idea that you really don't need that many. Sometimes it takes its form in the idea of minimal deterrence, that you don't really need that many weapons because just a few of them is enough to deter the other side. And then there's really another school of thought, which I find more compelling, which was articulated by people like Albert Wohlstetter and others, that no, actually, this is kind of a complicated business because it's not just enough to have some weapons on your side. You have to be able to have enough to withstand actually a disabling first strike and then still impose enough destruction and cost on your opponent that they will actually think twice about initiating.
If you look at policy documents like the National Defense Strategy, the Nuclear Posture Review, that have been put out recently, they really emphasize, the points you've made about the challenges of the security environment we're facing, changes in the security environment, the modernization and expansion of Chinese nuclear capabilities, Russian nuclear threats to the U.S. homeland, to allies, partners, and the whole spectrum, just as you pointed out, not to mention, now there's a major land war in Europe for the first time since World War II, right? So that's a very complex situation, and it's changed dramatically over the past 25 years since 30 years since the end of the Cold War. In response, right, the country does have a complex and significant modernization program that it's undertaking right now. We're trying to do a lot. I think you had General Stacey Huser on one of your podcasts, and she kind of laid out the scope of the challenge and the work that we're undertaking as a country. So that's a big effort, and we're trying to apply, the most modern research, technology, development, engineering, and so forth to that effort. We also have a big effort in terms of stewarding the stockpile we have, the existing stockpile. That's a big and important issue. That requires a ton of specific technological and physics and computational and experimental science expertise, material science expertise, and the like. But that's not all that's not the entire scope of the challenge, right? We have to be also ready ahead of evolving threats and be ready to meet them, right? We're not going to be able to predict necessarily everything that comes down the line. So we've got to have a stance that enables us to meet them effectively for the country, provide options for the country. But the foundation of all that is stockpile research, technology, engineering, and science, right? That's the work that we've been doing for the last more than 25 years as part of the Stockpile Stewardship Program, and that's going to be the foundation of all of these efforts in terms of getting ready, executing the modernization program of record, getting ready for the future, stewarding the existing stockpile.
Yeah, just to add, I kind of look at this through a few lenses. One, right now we have an aging stockpile that is the foundation of our deterrent, and so every year we do a very careful and thorough study supporting the annual assessment of that stockpile, and that's getting more and more challenging as the stockpile ages. But it's critically important because that is the thing that is deterring our adversaries today, and so we can't ever lose focus on that, right? And then on top of it, now we're in the midst of 5 either new or modernization programs, life extension programs that we're having to reconstitute capabilities that we haven't really had in the post-Cold War era. And, we have to manufacture things in different ways. We have to use different materials. We have to meet different, evolving requirements like new delivery platforms or new challenges on the stockpile to target sequence. And so that's driving us, our ST&E capabilities to, kind of meet that challenge while we have to maintain this aging stockpile. And while we're doing that, we've got the whole production complex that we didn't invest in for almost 30 years that we're trying to reconstitute. And again, we want to reconstitute that in a way that gives us the most flexibility for the future. So we're trying to use the most modern manufacturing techniques we can use, not just the techniques that we used when we were making the stockpile that we have today in the 1970s and 1980s. And so that's driving a need for our focus on ST&E and our ability to help inform those choices. And then we look at all that, and unfortunately, it just takes us too long to respond. Right?
Yeah.
Right now, our modernization programs take 12, 14 years to put something from beginning of the concept to put it into initial operating capability. And I think it's been widely recognized that is not going to, that pace will not deter our adversaries in the future, especially as they're innovating on a pretty rapid timescale. And so I think the whole complex is thinking about how do we go faster in the future? And a big part of that is, do we have the ideas? Do we have the concepts? Are we ready to go? Should someone come and ask us and say, hey, we've got a gap in deterrence here. This is the capability we need. We have to be ready with the, potential answers. And so we got, a big part of what we're doing right now is thinking about those things so that we're ready to kind of be able to plug that gap and try and shorten that time so we can respond. So it's incredibly exciting time, an incredibly challenging time, and a lot riding on.
That's how I would see Europe. The Russians, they know they can't compete on a 5th gen air power kind of plane. What we're seeing in Ukraine is the outcome of essentially very little air power being used by either side. That would not be the case if they were up against NATO. NATO would be coming with all of our 5th gen forces, our 4th gen enabled by 5th gen, 4th gen plus. Very quickly, the skies would be ours, and we would be rolling up ground forces. It would be a really ugly look for Russia. And so what does Russia then have to do? Well, they've thought through this, and one of the reasons why they developed these ultra low and very low yield nuclear weapons is because they have to somehow knock those sortie rates down. So if I go off after the air bases, okay, well, now I can take out NATO air bases. Those 5th gen sortie rates start plummeting. Now I actually have a chance in this conflict. what we would want to be able to do with a prompt, proportional, and penetrable response option is to forestall that option for the Russians. That is, we want to deter them from crossing the nuclear threshold in the first place. To do that, they need to see that we have some sort of credible response. Like you mentioned, we're not going to go to, global thermonuclear exchange because an airbase got struck or a missile defense site got struck with a 30-ton nuclear weapon. And so we want to deliver credible options to the president that are potentially more importantly, credible options when viewed from President Putin's perspective, so that he doesn't cross that threshold in the first place. That's the entire concept behind, and for that matter, behind the SLICM-N, the Sea Launched Cruise Missile Nuclear, which we had put into the 2018 NPR, and subsequently it got canceled and then reinserted by Congress. So when you take that kind of a picture and you apply it to the Pacific, some things change. Obviously, Pacific distances are different. The Chinese air is actually a little superior to Russian air. I would say the J-20 is been fielded in some numbers at least, whereas the so-called fifth gen Russian fighters have not. So there are some differences, but China has got to be looking at what's happening right now and saying this same thing could really happen to us, and we've got to recalculate. They've been thinking this for 20 years anyway. Now, while Russia and China would both rather be in the position of overwhelming conventional dominance in their sphere of influence, they're not, and both of them know that, and so they have to have this backstop, this recourse in case things get bad. We can strike Guam, for example, with two very low yield nuclear warheads atop a DF-26, for example, and we can take down Guam for at least a few days, let's say. That's operationally incredibly significant for China, and so that would be the same kind of impetus for China. Probably not in the same numbers, the thousands of non-strategics that Russia employs right now. We don't see that kind of capacity in China to be able to field those numbers, but certainly they are fielding significant numbers, and I would say more significant than you see in the standard press.
I guess looking at the Cold War, and I'll share quickly kind of the American perspective. There's a very different Russian perspective on this, but the American perspective is, the Cold War was not something that just kind of materialized in 1946 and 1947 and with the Berlin airlift. There had always been great hostility toward the Soviet Union, and the feeling was very mutual. This goes back to the revolution. Of course, there was Stalin. The United States didn't diplomatically recognize the existence of the Soviet Union until 1933. Stalin had killed, I think the estimates range between 3 and 20 million of his own people. Got rid of half of his officer corps, which is one of the reasons why they fared so poorly in World War II. Worked with Hitler to start World War II by invading Poland. So World War II was kind of this pause in a very bad relationship. And Hitler was this adhesive that brought countries like the UK and the US together with the Soviet Union. That went away. And after the war, we started to remember all of the issues that we had with each other, if you will, the US and the Soviet Union. And those were amplified as the 40s went on. And I think that, with people like Stalin in the world, it became clear, nuclear weapons may be around for a while. And that helped to solidify the future of the laboratory. Now you're getting into 1947, 1948. Of course, Berlin airlift starts in 1948. And that's going to lead to a series of really high profile, very dangerous Cold War events. So you've got the Berlin airlift, the Berlin blockade. So the Soviet Union tests their first nuclear weapon in August, at the end of August 1949. The Korean War starts. China becomes a communist country. And all these events happen within a couple of years. No shortage of news to report during those years. So at Los Alamos, you still had very much this World War II kind of temporary infrastructures. Buildings that were built very quickly and were not of the highest quality. But again, that was because you had hundreds of Americans being killed during the war every day. The job is we need to get the job done as quickly as possible. Now, as it became clear Los Alamos was going to be, probably a very permanent part of the country, there needed to be a completely new round of investment in both the laboratory and the community. Because one thing that Norris recognized was, well, we have to make Los Alamos like a nice, livable place. Maybe we should get some pavement and some restaurants and better school buildings and things like that, and better housing. And so those were issues. The laboratory and buildings that are still in use today, that you will see, like the CMR building, which is almost empty now, but CMR building, the SM39 machine shops, where the mailroom is, things like that. A lot of these, big concrete structures were built in the early 50s. The first, the original kind of main technical area was built around Ashley Pond in the center of town, for those who are familiar with Los Alamos. Everything was moved to another mesa, to South Mesa. The first, I think that the bridge, the Omega Bridge, that was opened, I think, around 1950. That kind of opened up South Mesa. You had the administration building opened in 1952. It's now a parking lot, but it was a big multi-story permanent building where the director sat from 1952, somewhere in that time frame. Was it 1952, 1955? Maybe it was 1955. All the way up into the early 2000s, And so those buildings start popping up basically as part, I think very much as part of the expansion of the complex. As, Los Alamos could keep up with the production demand in the 1940s because the United States had a nuclear monopoly. But once Stalin has nuclear weapons as well, we're going to need a production center because there's going to be an arms race. And of course, that materialized. So Rocky Flats was built. Los Alamos lost that mission. And I would say gladly, we wanted to be more focused on science, less focused on production, both important. Sandia, which had started as a Los Alamos division during World War II down at Kirtland that you mentioned earlier, Adam, it became an independent laboratory in 1948. Livermore becomes a laboratory, I believe, in 1952. And so you have all of these facilities that are coming into existence. Los Alamos is growing, and the threat of the Cold War and the stakes are growing along with the stock.
I would say that's a lot of where the rigor, we're spending a lot of time. I think the other is with Kansas City. If you haven't been here, you would probably say this is the newest, nicest facility within the NNSA, minus a couple office buildings. But if you look at the portfolio real estate here, it is by far the newest, but probably the least amount of buildings. But a tough thing to grasp is we occupied this space primarily starting in 2014 that we're in today. We lease now some additional space to help augment the growth. But the way infrastructure, the cycle to get infrastructure in place is about a 10-year, if not longer, cycle. So you need to be looking out at least 10 years to ensure you have the right amount of space. And when the requirements were defined for this building, that was 2006 requirements documentation. And that was when there was no China in the picture, no real adversarial actions. It was a peaceful time. And the decision was we needed, a Kansas City footprint and capability to support a weapon in production, which is in a weapon in development, and that, be, your W-76, B-6112, to help, maintain a capability. And now when you're up in 6, 7 weapon programs going on at one time, you're not necessarily right sized. And so we've really worked a lot on creating efficiencies within our processes, but also in our space, and helping find creative ways to secure additional space. Pandemic was a blessing, you could say, because it taught us how to be hybrid workers, use laptops, bring forward in some technology really a lot faster and in a very appropriate time, to when we need to be more technology savvy and leverage digital transformation tools